Hi guys, and happy new year. My favourite video that I film all year is always my classics I want to read in that year video, and today I am here to talk to you about the classics I would like to read in 2020. This year I am hosting my very own classics reading challenge called the Classics Community 2020 Reading Challenge, which I will leave all the information to in the description if you would like to join in. It's not too late if you would like to participate, and I have challenged myself to a few goals this year when it comes to my classics reading. So I'm aiming for around 25 classics, and as you'll see as the video progresses, I've also challenged myself to reading a few new genres and time periods. So I'm so excited to show you what I am planning to read this year in terms of classics, and I'm just so excited that I'm going to get right on into it and start by talking to you about my goal to read more French literature this year. I feel like I might be a bit too ambitious with this goal because one of the books I would like to read is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. I don't know a lot about this. I know about the musical. I've never watched an adaptation. I know some of the characters, but I don't really know anything else about it. And it's also a huge book, and that still overwhelms me. Even though I read lots of classics these days, I still look at long classics and think, I don't know how I'm going to read that. I don't think I'm clever enough. I don't think I can spend the time reading it. I don't think that I'm going to be able to get to the end. But I feel like I have got to try to overcome that. And I think that the best challenge for that is going to be to read Les Miserables. I want to read more French literature this year because it's not something that I have read a lot of. Even more modern stuff, I really haven't read much written by French authors, and I want to change that because I want to broaden my horizons and push myself. I feel like I am quite comfortable now with reading English classics that were written by English authors or are based in England, because I get the rules and conventions, but they are slightly changed when you look at literature from other countries. So whilst I will be reading other books by other authors of other nationalities, French literature is going to be my focus in 2020. And the other book that I'm hoping to read quite soon actually is Dangerous Liaisons by Chaudelot de Laclos, which I always hope that I'm saying right. I feel like I am going to have to brush off my French this year and try to get better at it, because it's something that I used to love and was really passionate about one day becoming fluent in French. So I'm hoping that this might rekindle that love too. This is told in letter form, the correspondence between two men who are trying to seduce two women, and it is also told in letters from those women too. I think that's going to make it a really good read because I love reading books in letter form. I've read lots of epistolary novels written in our modern day, but I haven't read as many classics. And that's also an informal goal of mine, to read more epistolary novels, because I think that letters can be very revealing. One of my favourite genres within classics is realism. I love reading books that feel very realistic, that you feel could happen, and that's something that I like to include in my own writing. When it comes to French literature, I'd like to read some French realism too, and I think I'm going to go for Honoré de Balzac's Lost Illusions. I don't know if this is the right place to start with Honoré de Balzac. I don't know a lot about him other than that his books are works of realism, and so please help me with this one. Is Lost Illusions the right place to start? Because I saw someone talking about it on Instagram and I really loved the sound of it, so I bought myself a copy secondhand, but I'm not sure if it's the right place to start. So I won't tell you any more details about it because I'm not sure if this is the one that I'm going to start with. But if you know anything about Balzac, please tell me where I should start, because I would love your help on this one. And then the final French classic I'm hoping to read is Indiana by George Sand. This was published in 1831 and was the first novel that George Sand wrote without a collaborator, and it is about a young woman who gets married to a much older man but finds herself falling in love with her neighbour. So it's kind of in the same vein as Madame Bovary, and I'm really into this kind of narrative. I think that it can be very revealing about women at the time and their roles, and also about how we consider love, but also I just find them quite thrilling to read, and I'm really looking forward to discovering more about George Sand in the process. Away from French literature now, and one of the other challenges I have set myself for my reading challenge this year is to read more Georgian literature, and there is actually a readathon happening in January called George January, where I'm hoping I will be able to build my confidence with reading Georgian classics. I love the likes of Jane Austen, and one of Jane Austen's greatest influences was an author called Frances Burney, or Fanny Burney as she is also known. In a previous year's video I featured Evelina, and even though I read half of it and really enjoyed it, I never read the other half, so that is one of the books that I would like to finish this year, and actually I'm going to restart it right from the beginning and hopefully finish it right through to the end. I really enjoyed it because it is about a woman called Evelina who is thrust into Georgian society, and she doesn't exactly play by the rules. She seems to mess a lot up and doesn't get the intricacies of how she is supposed to act, but I did find it quite confusing in places because Evelina has quite a lot of characters and quite a lot of people in her family that have very different roles. But I really liked the comedy of manners in here, which is one of my favourite things about Georgian literature. How you get this look at the society and how the author is almost poking fun of it. So I would like to read Evelina, and once I've read that I also have the journals and letters of Fanny Burney that I would like to read. Something I'm really into at the moment is reading journals, letter collections, that kind of thing, that say a lot about who the author was and what they stood for, and whilst I don't always like what I see, it brings the author to life and makes them human. When you read books sometimes there is the tendency to forget that somebody has sat down and spent all that time writing it, and so I also think that reading this will add to my knowledge of what society was like to live in at that time through the eyes of an author who was there. And then the other Georgian classic I would like to read is Belinda by Mariah Edgeworth. I've actually started reading this one already. I think I read it partly for the Classicsathon at the end of August, but I enjoyed it so much that I didn't want to rush it when I was reading it, so I thought that a fresh start in 2020 would be a good time to read this all the way through. I've absolutely loved what I've already read, and this is an interesting book in its own right, never mind the story, because it was one of the first books to feature an interracial relationship, but it was later edited because Mariah Edgeworth's father was not happy about it, and so it has been changed in subsequent versions to be a little more discriminatory, I suppose. I'm not entirely sure which version I have, but whichever one I have, I'm gonna then read the scenes that correlate in the other editions so I can talk about it more fully and really understand what was going on in Mariah Edgeworth's mind as she was writing both versions. It is another comedy of manners type novel about Georgian society where the main character Belinda is being courted by two men. I think it's slightly like Emma by Jane Austen in that it has that kind of matchmaking going on, and I really love the writing style, so I think that Mariah Edgeworth might become a new favourite, and once I've read this hopefully I'll be able to read lots more by her. I am super excited about this next book, and it's going to be the book that I start off the year by reading. It is The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. I try not to ramble on about Edith Wharton too much because I just keep talking about her lately. I can't shut up about her. I love her writing so much. And The House of Mirth, like The Age of Innocence, which I read last year, is set in New York society and is about a woman who is trying to fight for her independence. This fight for freedom ends up in her being ruined with scandal, and because of Edith Wharton's unique knowledge of society at this time, her writing is incredibly powerful and so believable, very realistic and uncomfortable because of it at times. She has these central characters who defy something about the society that they live in, and she comments on it so perfectly that you can't help but analyse your own beliefs. Apparently this did cause quite a scandal as well when it was published in 1905 because of the way that it looks at New York families and because of the way that it condemns marriage for women. All themes that I really loved in The Age of Innocence, and whilst I haven't featured any more Edith Wharton on this pile, I think that I will read more of her books during the course of the year, and I'd like to read some of her short stories too. Back to some Victorian classics, and one that I would like to read is New Grub Street by George Gissing. This is all about publishing in the 1880s and 1890s, and he wrote it very quickly because he was in a bit of trouble, needed to publish a good book to make some money. I want to read this because I want to find out more about what publishing a book was like during this period, and the main character in this is trying to publish a book. Tentatively, I would like to write a neo-Victorian novel which features publishing books, and so I want to do some research into that, and I think this would be a good place to start. I hasten to add though that this isn't a book that I have a publishing deal for, it's just something that is living in my head at the moment, and I'm perfectly willing to take 10 years to write it, but I want to write neo-Victorian fiction, Victorian books that feel like they were written then but are written now. And it's going to be a big challenge, but I'm perfectly willing to challenge myself to do it, so that's something that I am working on at the moment, so that's why I'd like to read this. I recently read a book called The Doll Factory by Elizabeth McNeill, which was published within the last year but is set during the Great Exhibition of the 1850s, and part of it centres around the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, which led me down a PRB rabbit hole because I just wanted to find out more about them and the people that were involved. When I did my GCSEs and my A-levels in English literature, I studied a poem called Remember by Christina Rossetti, which is a beautiful sonnet. I studied it twice, and so it was always one that I remembered, but I've never read any other Christina Rossetti. So here I have a copy of her selected poems. This is published by Penguin Classics, and I really like their editions of poetry. So I would love to find out more about Christina Rossetti, read lots of her poems, find out more about her life and the way in which she lived, and also find out more about the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And then we have Mrs. Henry Wood's East Lynne. This was one of the first sensation novels, and I would love to film a video all about sensation novels and what they were about this year. So this is the last one that I need to read for that video, and I just love sensation novels. I read Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon last year, and the year before I read The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, so you'll see me talk about them a bit more, hopefully, in the future. I'll read to you from the back because I often find that trying to describe sensation novels is quite confusing. So it says that all the conventional virtues of the perfect wife and mother are here embodied in a beautiful and unblemished heroine who is lured to her downfall by one of the most superbly malevolent and caddish villains in all Victorian literature. Her disgrace is complete, and Mrs. Henry Wood recounts it with relish, endorsing society's retributive and unforgiving judgment in ringing authorial tones. But there is relish too in a telling of the tale, and her audience loved it. So one of the things that I love about sensation novels is that they reflect on the morality of the day, the ideas and morals that the Victorians held most dearest, and the sensation novelists come along and point out some of the hypocrisy in this, but also point out that things weren't quite as perfect as the Victorians wanted them to be. So they often look at things like marriage and the family because the Victorians believed that without a perfect family life, all society would collapse. So I can't wait to read this one. It sounds so exciting. And then we come on to the final pile that I have, and the first one I have to show you is The Old Wives' Tale by Arnold Bennett. I'd like to read more Edwardian fiction this year, and even though that's not a pressing goal of mine, I am tending to go towards more Georgian and French. I would like to read more Edwardian fiction, and quite a few of you now have recommended to me Arnold Bennett. This was published in 1908 and follows two sisters who take different paths, and then they meet again in the future, and it's all about how their lives have diverged. It is apparently a fascinating, beautifully crafted exploration of the impact of environment on the lives and emotions of two women, and I have really high expectations for this one, so hopefully I will enjoy it. Recently I have been reading a book called A Beginner by Rhoda Broughton, which I couldn't find anywhere other than archive.org. I had to scour the internet to find a copy that I could download to my phone because it's not in print anymore, which is such a shame. But I have got a Rhoda Broughton book on my shelf that has been in print and I managed to get a copy of, and it is her first book, Cometh Up as a Flower. This was another book that was quite shocking when it was published, and I am really interested in reading books by authors who have been forgotten to time or who you don't hear a lot about, who are very underrated. Rhoda Broughton was born in North Wales during the Victorian period, and she was related to J. Sheridan Le Fanu, who wrote Carmilla, which is the predecessor to Dracula, and he helped her to publish Cometh Up as a Flower and her other book that she published around the same time, and really encouraged her with her writing. But at times she could be quite shocking because her female characters can be quite outspoken and they were seen as too modern for the day. So that's just the kind of thing that I really love. I think that she was ahead of her time. Another underrated author I would like to read, and one you have been asking to hear me talk about, I would like to read Amy Dilwyn's Jill. This is a Victorian look at same-sex relationships, in particular a relationship between two women. Again, she was very ahead of her time. The main character Jill is a gentlewoman who runs away to London to become a lady's maid and then uses her position to get closer to her mistress. Amy Dilwyn was another Welsh author, and this is published by Honno Press, who are doing great work at bringing these Welsh women's classics to life again. And then finally we come on to the last two books, and one of the mini challenges, one of the informal goals I've set myself this year is to read more Victorian non-fiction. So in 2019 I read Elizabeth Gaskell's biography of Charlotte Bronte, and it really made me think about how much I love analysing non-fiction and what it could do at this time, what it said about the people it was writing about, but also what it said about the context of the way it was written and who would be reading it. So I'd like to read Henry Mayhew's London Labour and the Poor, and I've read some of this already because I thought that I was going to write a book set in London around the time or slightly earlier than this was written, which was in the 1850s, but I'm not sure if I'm going to now. But it was incredibly insightful about the way in which the poor in London were living, and Henry Mayhew did this very detailed study into the lives of those people and documented their stories. When we talk about the Victorian period and Victorian living, I think it is easy to go towards thinking about the middle and upper classes, but something like this looks at the lives of the majority of the population of London and exactly how they were living, and I think it's so important that these stories were preserved. And then the other non-fiction I would like to read is selected writings of John Ruskin. I had some John Ruskin essays in a Penguin Little Black Classics, and I read one of the essays and I really enjoyed reading it. I found it quite rallying and I could imagine John Ruskin saying it. And in finding out more about the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and Ruskin's connection to the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, it made me want to find out more about what his thoughts were towards art and culture, and to just find out more about his life. He was one of the top Victorian critics and his writing was hugely influential at the time, so I think it's really important to focus attention on books like this that might not necessarily be fiction works that are the most fun to read, but are still really interesting and also help in your reading of other texts. lists. So those are the classics that I am hoping to read in 2020. I'm already itching to get started because there are so many books there that I cannot wait to read. It should be noted that I won't necessarily read all of these, but at the start of the year, these are the ones that I am hoping to read. And it's a video that I refer back to constantly throughout the year to make sure that I am reading everything I said I was going to read, but I won't necessarily read them all. So you'll have to check in with my reading wrap-ups throughout the year to find out more about the ones that I have read. If reading classics is something that you are interested in doing this year, then you can check out the Classics Community 2020 Reading Challenge. We have a Goodreads page and we are using the hashtag Classics Community on Instagram and Twitter to talk more about classics and what we are reading. So I'll leave the links in the description to where you can find out more about that, as well as all the links to the books that I have mentioned in this video. So thank you so much for watching this video and good luck with your reading this year. Happy reading!